NC Pork, good for the plate, great for the state. He is the 38-year veteran journalist of the Atlantic Coast Conference, an attorney, a business owner, entrepreneur, and also a two-time North Carolina Sportscaster of the Year, the one and the only David Glenn. And he is a 20-plus year basketball coaching junkie. He has been an assistant coach. He has been the head coach at Santa Clara. He has been a part of postseason championships. And right now, he is the head coach of Timeout every week right here. He is the former Seton Hall Pirate, Kerry Keating. We are all coming together every week here on the North Carolina Sports Network to talk basketball on Tobacco Road. And it was not a very deep contingent of Tobacco Road teams making their way into March Madness, and only one team remains. But that one team, the Duke Blue Devils, is also the only remaining ACC team. Gentlemen, not a good look for the Atlantic Coast Conference in week one of the NCAA tournament. And David Glenn, I know there's some things that have happened, some stats that you can reveal that will show us that it perhaps is even darker than we expected.
Yeah, Mike, it's mostly bad news for the ACC, mostly bad news for the great state of North Carolina. Although shout out, of course, to K.O. Siddle and UNC Wilmington, Allen Huss, and High Point. They played really good teams in the round of 64. They came up short, but both of those coaches and both of those programs deserve a lot of bouquets, even in the aftermath of defeat. One of the nuggets that we dug out was that this is the first Sweet 16 ever, and we're 50 years into the Sweet 16 concept, 1975 to 2025. First time ever that only 4 leagues are represented in those 16 teams still standing. The previous record was actually 7 different conferences. That was the lowest ever prior to this year. And anyone who's been a viewer or listener to Timeout over these past 6 months knows that this is a byproduct of something we've all discussed and come to understand, and that is the era of name, image, likeness, the era of immediately eligible transfers, the era of the transfer portal, which makes it easier for players to jump around. It has ended up favoring the wealthiest schools. And I'm not trying to take anything away from the 16 head coaches who are still alive with their teams. I don't want to take anything away from the great players on those 16 teams. But I think we all need to recognize that it is not accidental that this is the first time in a half century that only 4 conferences are represented in the Sweet 16. I still enjoy this event. I'm not going to lose any joy for March Madness because of this kind of consolidation of power, if you want to call it that. But under this system that's continuing to change, and it'll be different again next year, those schools with the most name, image, likeness money put themselves in position to advance in ways that the mid-majors had no chance or little chance. The low majors had 0 chance. Everybody loves a Cinderella, but today's version of Cinderella is going to be like, a 10-seed Arkansas from the Southeastern Conference. And they're only Cinderella because they're such a low seed. Even the Razorbacks obviously had a lot of money to throw around for John Calipari in the transfer portal. The ACC whiffed a year ago at this time when the Atlantic Coast Conference and its coaches miscalculated, with John Shire and Duke as the exception, miscalculated how much money was going to be thrown around to build college basketball teams. Not everybody who spent a lot of money is still standing in this Sweet 16, but if you either weren't able to spend that kind of money or you just decided not to for whatever reason, you have been sent home already. And again, that is not mere coincidence. It's just a byproduct of what college basketball is here in 2025.
And barely in at that, one ACC team. Let's talk about the 16 that are in there. One ACC team, 7 from the SEC, and some may be alarmed by the 16 and the 7 and the 14 and the 7 and the Sweet 16. But let's not forget the Big East had 11 teams in the past, but they only got 2 of those teams in. Obviously speaks to the strength of the SEC, and then 4 each from the Big 12 and the Big 10. Albeit some of those other schools in the Big 12 and Big 10 were in the Pac-10 in the past, so we're still making the transition as to who's in what conference here. But nevertheless, I think we're undergoing right here, what we're seeing firsthand is a fundamental shift in what college basketball is. It's definitely not what it used to be, and it's certainly not even what it's going to become yet. There's a very, very much a sense of uneasiness right now into what to expect. As you mentioned, the portal opening up today, David, like coaches have to worry about day to day. Administrators have to worry about this year. But I think the next 3 to 4 years are going to come very, very fast. And if you're not prepared, and we talked a little bit about this, the ACC maybe not prepared for this year. Certainly, you're playing a little bit of catch up. But if you're not prepared for what's coming in the next 3 to 5 years, when regulations come in, when possible unions are in place, when there's labor relations, when there's human resources, when there's a business to be built on every campus within the business of the campus that now is college athletics and specifically college basketball, you need to be prepared from an infrastructure standpoint now more than ever, because I think the chasm will really widen if you're not, one, at least prepared to make an investment at the level that the others are, and that has been seen in the SEC this year, getting a little bit of a jump start. But Duke really making that statement as the only team in the league that made that visible and tangible investment, and look at the results. Now they have a lot of things set up, and they had a unique circumstance of transition from a legendary coach into someone that seemingly is going to be there for the entirety of his career unless the higher calling comes. But this is really a transitional and a poignant moment, I think, for the ACC to make some really, pointed decisions as to how the league is going to operate. Because the league can't tell each school what to do, but they can give them guidelines. And I think there is some strength in your league kind of coming together to support itself. And I think back to my upbringing in the Big East. And it was a different time, of course, but there was a camaraderie amongst those coaches that they were going to go to war with each other throughout the 2 months of the season and represent properly. And that showed up in the 84-85 season that had 3 teams in the Final Four. But when the time came where the proverbial you-know-what hit the fan and one of their coaches was in trouble, you know what they did? They voted that coach of the year in the league. Like, they honestly protected themselves. Now, this is a mindset shift into how this translates into nowadays. I think out of these 4 conferences, super conferences now, if you will, and obviously the Big East and the AAC, maybe even the Atlantic 10, and we can get into that a little bit, how they may benefit from not having football. If you can really work with each other to help each other out, and this is where I think there's going to be an interesting decision to be made for scheduling and how you schedule in the non-conference. I think there's a chance for one, to get your house in order at high level so you're able to play in this month, but 2, to get your conference in order to help teams have the best shot year in and year out to do that.
One of the things that I was doing over the weekend was consuming a lot of different ACC and NCAA basketball media than I probably should have. And one source that I ran across that was based here in the Old North State was talking about ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips. And guys, he was pretty down on Commissioner Phillips, said it was his fault that the ACC was losing ground in the NCAA basketball landscape and that he needed to be replaced. And it just reminded me of the fact that, number one, there are a lot of people in the 2025 media who don't know how college athletics works. And also, number 2, they don't understand the fundamental duty of a commissioner. Nowhere in Jim Phillips' job description with the Atlantic Coast Conference does it has him as being the lead person responsible for the development of the sport on that campus. So when I constantly hear in all these different sources about how the ACC has been outspent by the SEC, Kerry Keating, what does that mean in terms of a roster? Because does that mean that they're spending 8, 10, $12 million? Because that's pretty much the going number that we're hearing.
There's been no number in terms of a salary cap within the salary cap yet. And until then, it's up to your own devices to decide how much you want to spend. And this is where the Atlantic 10 may actually have a little bit of a benefit, because by and large, there's no football. And even the Big East outside of UConn, there's no football to take what would be the lion's share of this $20 to $22 million. It seems like the chatter is that it's a 6 to 7 million towards men's basketball, whether it's 12 to 13 for football, and then maybe a million or whatever towards whatever else. There's Title IX implications still yet to be determined in all this, and they're still not sure if that means that this has to be evenly divided as it has in the past for a lot of supportive measures that basketball took on both sides. But Until that happens, I think a conference, it's certainly within their power and their right to, I wouldn't say mandate, but heavily encourage a floor, if
Right.
you will. Hey, you have to at least put, let's call it 5 million into basketball and 12 into football. Maybe they set a ceiling on that, and maybe that ceiling isn't the roof. Maybe it's whatever the heck you want to spend. And it's, you want to put 19 into football, one to basketball.
Right.
Well, you better be winning the national championship in football. Right? Extreme example, but I think from a commissioner standpoint, if you can take a holistic view on what's realistic in each market too, and this is kind of getting a little bit granular on this, Mike and Dave, but we used to always complain as coaches, and complain as a relative term depending on who's doing it. The bigger market teams in the old recruiting rules had built-in ways around them because they could hop in their car and go watch a game 5 miles away. Case in point, UCLA, Los Angeles. Everybody used to complain about, well, you can go watch a game and no one would even really know. Now that changed a little bit when the internet and video phones came out, because you can't hide in plain sight when it's on video. And I'm not saying people were sleuthing the recruiting days that we were counting, but I'm bringing this up in the point of nowadays, and I think about here in Raleigh, and what could be, and what's a exploding metropolitan area right now, with rich with resources already, but now even more with talent and population in the ecosystem, in the ether. What we're getting back to now is what NIL was originally intended to do. It's a marketing ability to have the players market themselves for marketing money. The salary is the salary, whether scholarships included or not. But when you think about the metropolitan areas that some of these schools are in, and what they can do to balance out whatever that salary cap is by adding on real marketing ability for players to make significant money, I think that's a huge advantage. So there's two things. One, do you have football? Obviously, we do here in the ACC. As it relates to the Atlantic 10 and some others, Missouri Valley, maybe not. Two, are you so strong in your immediate area, your county, your town, your state, your region, that you can market your players to balance out whatever discrepancy may be if football is taking a majority of that money? This is where I think the conference comes in. This is where I think the conference can provide guidance and some guidelines and maybe some mandates in terms of attention to that, and having some conference NIL ability too. No one's brought this up yet. Everyone's worried about the individual. Well, why aren't we as a conference creating NIL opportunities that we can evenly divide amongst the 18 members in the ACC? This is something that I think you have to start thinking about. If your conference, I don't know if the SEC is doing this, but if I'm in the SEC office, I am absolutely doing this to try to help the teams that didn't make it. We're going to NIL opportunity as a conference and then divvy these out. It's another layer on top. It's just free market. And I think this is something that the ACC can do to help themselves out while all these coaching changes are happening and the intermediate rostering and salary and on-campus logistics get set up. I think it's a unique way to do it. It may or may not be wrong, but I'm just spitballing and thinking off the top of my head. It's exactly what I would do if I was one of these four conferences, is strengthen our own and get more of our own in, because we're not just going to get one every year.
Yeah, Mike, let me try to put some meat on the bones of this picture for the fans out here whose heads might be spinning on all this stuff. I'll give you several things that I know to be true and just one thing that I think regarding your question about the ACC Commissioner, Jim Phillips. One thing I know to be true. There was an ACC basketball team that finished in the bottom third of this new 18-school monstrosity. And this past year, their name, image, likeness budget for men's basketball was between $2 and $3 million. That same school is planning to spend $8 to $10 million in men's basketball this coming year, effectively a tripling of its name, image, likeness budget specifically for men's basketball. So that gives, I think, fans a really clear picture of some of the dynamics in play here. Another thing that I know to be true, at one of the most recent Atlantic Coast Conference meetings, you Mike, as a former AD, know that leagues get together X number of times per year. And there's, some snoozy type stuff. There's some connecting the dots, scheduling type stuff. Usually your TV partner comes in and gives a presentation. There's a lot of different things that go on, and there's not as much time for sort of pontificating. But ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips specifically sent the message, in case it hadn't been figured out yet. We didn't spend enough as a league, not the conference office, but the 18 basketball playing members. We didn't spend enough in name, image, likeness. And whereas it's not in the ACC bylaws that they could say, hey, Coach Kerry Keating at School X, you must spend a floor of X million dollars. The bylaws don't work that way. It's more what Coach was talking about, an advisory position. We're not going to kick you out of the league if you don't spend $6 million in name, image, likeness on men's basketball. But we've done our due diligence. We have a pretty good understanding of this picture. We now have a much better understanding of how we screwed up royally last spring and summer by not throwing enough dollars around. And these 16 teams still standing, almost all of them did a lot of that. That message absolutely was sent earlier this calendar year by ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips. One other thing that I know, and then my opinion on Jim Phillips. The Southeastern Conference, as we've discussed on previous editions of Time Out, raided the Atlantic Coast Conference by throwing around money at this time last year. Miles Kelly is one of the best players at number 1 seed Auburn. He is formerly of Georgia Tech. The Ole Miss team that just sent North Carolina home, its best player is Sean Padula, formerly a multi-year starter at Virginia Tech. There are other examples. The SEC ended up with 10 or more starting caliber players that they plucked from last year's ACC rosters. You know how many happened in reverse? 1. Carolina got Van Allen Lubin from Vanderbilt of the SEC. If you have that 10-to-1 ratio against any other major conference where they're getting 10 of your best players and you're only getting 1 of their biggest contributors, you're going to come out on the short end of the stick. And that's why the SEC has 7 teams in the Sweet 16 right now. And the ACC has only 1, Duke, which has an enormous basketball budget generally and a very significant name, image, likeness budget specifically. And then the one thing that I think, the only fair criticism in this context that I see for Jim Phillips, could he a year ago have sent the same message that he just spent this calendar year? If he was a visionary, if he was ahead of the curve, he could have. But the reason that I think I agree with your earlier statement, Mike, that most of the attacks on Jim Phillips are unfair, and some of them are outrageous. Like, it's his fault that the ACC is in a sub-market television deal. He wasn't even around when those deals were negotiated. So there's just some unnecessary, unfair piling on of Jim Phillips. And what I would argue in his defense is, who was best positioned to see how the name, image, likeness trend was going to go? It's not the commissioner sitting in his office in Charlotte. It's basketball coaches and their top assistants, whoever is talking to these young players who are saying to them, yeah, I'm interested in UNC or I'm interested in Georgia Tech or whatever. And then the feedback keeps coming, well, wait a minute, we offered $500,000 and this kid still chose this other school. Jim Phillips was not in those conversations. No. Jim Phillips later got feedback about how the ACC targeted a whole bunch of dudes who ended up in the Big Ten or the SEC, but he wasn't in the trenches the way these coaches and their advisors were. Those are the folks who miscalculated a year ago, and Duke is the last team standing from the ACC is a direct byproduct. You can criticize players and execution and coaches all you want. It starts with talent. And the ACC 1 year ago badly miscalculated how the name, image, likeness world was going to unfold. And it's been rapidly changing every single year, right? Paolo Banchero at Duke several years ago was one of the first 7-figure name, image, likeness guy. Now Duke's quarterback gets $4 million. I mean, it's not like an economics expert has 100 years of American data to study, right? No, the name, image, likeness is several years old and it's dramatically changing from year to year. And you gotta really pay attention to stay ahead of the curve. Otherwise, this is going to be one of those rare years. To Duke's credit, 46 straight years the ACC has been a part of the Sweet 16. That streak would have ended had Duke lost to Baylor. 46 years. So they're still in, but obviously their average is 3 Sweet 16 teams per year. And this year and several other recent years, the ACC's gotten only one team in, and that's obviously falling way short of its historical trademark.
One more thing on this topic before we jump ahead in the show. And next week, I really hope, guys, that we can do a deep dive into how you put together a modern day college basketball roster, not only in terms of talent on the court, but also through the wallet. But Kerry, take me through right now. What are Jim Tanner and Hubert Davis doing? What is Will Wade and whomever is going to be his general manager at NC State? Or what is John Shire and his general manager doing right now to get ready for what is happening right now? The transfer portal being flooded by players from almost every possible dimension of college basketball.
Now, coaches are by and large very reactive to circumstances, both on the good and the bad side. And they're obviously, in some cases, very opinionated about why they're reactive to that. Some of the things that in all these press conferences that we're privileged to see now that the tournament is here, the required ones and the not so required ones, because everyone's a reporter now and throws a camera phone in your face and wants 5 minutes of a snippet, is the relationship part of this that's difficult to manage. And, I think back to, 2 weeks ago when the Will Wade conversation first happened. It was before the tournament, and we talked about this. And I remember saying that about Will, that it wasn't going to be an issue in the tournament. He was going to embrace it because his relationship with his players is above board. It's open. It's honest. There's nothing to hide anymore. I mean, everything is in the ether. If you're worried about players or agents using direct messages or the DMs, as the kids say now, to communicate, then you're worried about the wrong thing, because you can't control that. You can embrace it and address it. I think what they're doing is either strengthening the relationships that they already have currently of the players that they're convinced that they want to keep on their roster. This is kind of hard as a coach who did it the old way and are now getting ready to do it the new way, if you will. It was kind of taboo after every year when you brought up to a kid that he may be better off someplace else. This was like almost contractual language that you couldn't do that in some cases for weak guys that couldn't handle it, Mike. Some of your counterparts would contract that. They were so afraid of transfers. They were so driven by APR and they were driven by retention. And that's fine. It's a different type of relationship now that for the most part is going to become primarily based on a transaction, but it's also going to be based on a result that could lead to a relationship that's pretty special. And you saw that in how Will reacted to, one, winning on the first round, and two, losing in the second round, three, knowing full well that the 2 days after he'd be gone. That's a very difficult thing to handle. So if you're Hubert Davis and Jim Tanner, if you're John Shire and Rachel Baker, if you're Will and the oncoming staff, you have to really get into the business side of talent assessment and retention, and how to go about that now as it plugs into the cost of that. But also, where do the heartstrings come in that, right? So in the past, you would redshirt kids. You would get kids that wanted to go a fifth year and take a graduate. There was a long-term path. It's just a shift that everything's short-term right now. And there's only a few far in between. And this actually got brought up by Mick Cronin after the Tennessee game about Zakai Ziegler. Being like, they're going to covet guys that stay in the program for 3 to 4 years now. Where in the past, it was get the next guy in, let me get the next. Now it's what can we do to keep guys here? How can we create the value that they'll see that they don't want to go chasing more, that the grass isn't always greener, that we can have this type of success in the postseason together and build meaningful relationships? Well, that all starts now. In your immediate assessment of their happiness, of their productivity, of their fit, where they fit in the roster and also in the future. And I think it's going to be pretty refreshing for some of these NC State guys. The conversations that Will's going to have with them are going to be direct to the point, and there'll be no fluff in there. Here's where we see you. Here's where do you see yourself, and here's where the differences are. This is what it's going to take to stay here. This is how much is going to be here. And if you want to go elsewhere, we'll certainly help you in that. But there's only so much we can do because that open market is being run by third-party agents right now until it's got some sort of regulation. It's speed dating, but it really calls on a skill set to have an assessment of what's important for these young men because they still are making decisions that, one, could affect the rest of their lives now, or two, could affect the next stage in the rest of their lives that could affect the rest of their lives later. These are life-changing decisions, and I think they really start at its core with the fundamental basic, concept of where is our relationship at and how happy are you? This is an ongoing thing you're going to have to do in college basketball, quarterly, monthly, yearly. It's going to be an ongoing, it's just a shift. It's a new thing. And I think for these guys now in the non-Dukes of the world, Jay Lucas at Miami, every ACC program is really going to have to take some internal inventory at the very highest level in a quick amount of time.
And remember, 17 of the 18 ACC schools now have their focus on this stuff in a way that the Blue Devils, they don't want to be asking Isaiah Evans, are you back next year? They don't want to be asking Tyrese Proctor, are you going to be riding this great shooting wave all the way into the NBA, or are you going to come back as a senior for the Blue Devils? So Duke has this divided, difficult attention. 17 other schools can already turn the page and move on to these difficult questions. But the question I get all the time is, why does the transfer portal open now? And the long story short is, coaches want as much certainty as possible, as quickly as possible. So they don't want the portal to be the summer months. But the academics in the room will not let the transfer portal window hit exam season. I know fans roll their eyes anytime we bring up academics in any context, but the decision makers in the room do care, and they don't want athletes flying on official visits. As a college professor, what I can tell you, when are most universities in exam season? May, right? So coaches say, why don't we wait until after the Final Four to open the transfer portal window? Well, then you're in mid-April. And unless you want a 2-week transfer portal window, you're pouring into exams in May. So there's competing elements, and that's why we have this odd window beginning on March 24th and going for into the latter part of April, but avoiding exam season. That's the why. But here's the situation at places like Duke or Carolina or the other schools we cover closely. If you're John Shire, you have 4 high school seniors, all of them prep All-Americans, by the way, in Duke's case. They're coming in. They know they have somebody on the Duke staff helping them with their branding/NIL opportunities. You also are waiting for the judge's decision in the month of April to tell us how this new college sports world is going to work. She still has not approved that whole 20+ million internal revenue sharing thing. That we're all expecting that, but that doesn't happen until that court date in April, assuming it does happen. But John Shire has those 4 guys, right? But then think of the uncertainty. Tyrese Proctor might leave, but he could stay for his senior year. Isaiah Evans is on the NBA radar, but he probably would have an interest in staying at Duke and having a very prominent role as a sophomore, whereas this year he was a backup. Does Caleb Foster want to be back for his junior year, or could he transfer out? I mean, I would think Patrick Gongba would stay for his sophomore year. Malik Brown may stay for his senior year at Duke, right? That's a lot of questions. And I don't think Duke's spending an extraordinary amount of time playing hypothetical games as they're trying to make sure they can beat Arizona on Thursday and get to the Elite Eight. Whereas at Carolina, the pages have been turned and some hard decisions have to be made. Assuming Van Allen Lubin wants to stay in Chapel Hill, which he says he does, and assuming Hubert Davis sees a big role for him, which is probably the case, they have to come up with a number. We're living in a college version of the salary cap era. Seth Trimble wants to stay. I'm sure Hubert Davis wants him to stay. What's their number? Does Cade Tyson leave? Does Jalen Washington stay for his senior year, even though Hubert Davis deep down inside knows Jalen Washington is not a starting caliber ACC center. Fine off the bench, but if you're asking him to be a starter, as the Tar Heels did this year, you're probably miscalculating the talent level that you need to compete at the highest level of the ACC and nationally. What happens with Elliot Cadeau? Does he want to stay? Is he going to stay? How much of the salary cap would they be willing to give him? How much is Carolina going to get beyond the internal revenue sharing from the various collectives and third parties? There are fewer questions at Duke. There are more questions virtually everywhere else. And if you're Will Wade heading into NC State, man, you have almost a blank canvas. There's 7 guys out of eligibility at NC State. I mean, that's a clean sweep. So a couple of his best players at McNeese are out of eligibility, but a couple of his other best players there have eligibility remaining. So maybe he brings 1 or 2 of them, but he will be very active throwing money around in the portal because that was part of the plan that lured him to NC State to begin with.
And for those people out there who like to spin poetic about, I don't like the direction of college football, it's so transient now with the players and coaches. Just a reminder that when a guy named Mack Brown came to the University of North Carolina the first time, he had the entire team in a meeting room at the Keenan Fieldhouse and told everybody who was first or second team All ACC to stand up. He then had everybody give them a round of applause. And as the story is told to me, those people were asked to leave the room. Staying behind was what was sifted out. It was all of the other players who had led to some pretty disappointing seasons at the end of the Dick Crum era. And they were told to hit the road. And that's the way I look at it right now, guys. Kerry, you've been in those meetings before with the old system of college basketball. And David, I know you've covered it so long, you feel like you've been in those rooms too. And right now, those are just hard conversations going on with everybody on the roster. Everybody has a dollar amount. If you don't meet that, hey, I'd like to be here. But Vin Allen Lubin, if he's looking at literally what would be his 4th school in college, then I don't think he's the type of person that's probably going to stay at Carolina anyway. It's no insinuation on him. I don't know him at all. I'm just using that as an example. I mean, these kids, the lack of the loyalty is stunning. And with some of the coaches, especially on the mid-major level, I mean, if you're in the CAA, like Takeo Siddle, or in the Big South, like Alan Huss, man, right now, I don't even know why you bother to go to work for the next 3 weeks.
Hey, Mike, Campbell's 2 best players are in the portal as we speak. Charlotte 49ers best player in the portal. One of Davidson's best players in the portal. The guy TK Simpkins that you saw play at Elon, really good guard. He's in the portal. North Carolina A&T's best player in the portal. UNC Asheville's best player, Jordan Marsh, in the portal. Remember our recent guest, Mike Jones from UNC Greensboro. His best player, Donovan Atwell, in the portal. Another starter, Kenyon Giles, who's actually probably his best player, I should say, in the portal. 3 of Mike Jones's 5 starters at UNCG are in the portal. And today's the first day of the portal.
No.
So I don't know how you do it at the mid-major and low-major level. It's complicated for these ACC schools because of the number of decisions that have to be made and the speed dating aspect of it that Coach Keating circled. You can't wait till April 1st and say, I wonder which power forward we should go after now. I mean, you snooze, you lose, because these decisions can be made very, very quickly. And because of tampering, some of these guys already know where they're going to go the day they put their name in the portal.
Yeah.
Well, you bring up tampering, David. I chuckle because the portal officially opens today.
No.
The portal's open year round. Like, it is what it is, right? And the problem that we have now, and until this gets rectified, is there's no process to become an official agent for these kids, both when they're in college and when they're in high school even. Some are registered agents that obviously have bigger eyes than just the immediate prize. They're talking about getting a relationship that will translate into the multi-millions and more years, if you will, in the NBA possible, or Europe. But there are people acting as agents that are unfortunately setting markets based on largely what their performance was and their relationships with others that are willing to pay a certain number. And this puts the onus on the coaches to really have a plan in place and assess their own salary cap that's now going to be starting next year. what they're willing to pay, but also are they dialed in and in lockstep with the athletic marketing team to even the playing field? And we know that's never the case because there's a hierarchy, right? I mean, you think the marketing team at State is ready for what Will's gonna Tasmanian devil them through to help them? No, they're thinking about how to help Dave out because the fall is going to be here before the winter, and we got to get football into the national championship picture. We got to take a step. Heck, we got to take a step because the team down the road took a step that's shocking the whole landscape. If we don't do something to help Dave, we're going to be behind in football too. So it almost behooves the distribution of resources, and I'll say State in particular, just as an example, as you mentioned, a clean slate and a change, to have someone in house that can really take a hold of some marketing chops specifically for basketball while also keeping everything above board. These aren't under the table deals. This is an opportunity where everyone in Wolfpack Nation is going to feel great because there's a change and there's optimism, and Will put the whole thing on a stage at the expense of another school. And, Boo's made a commitment and clean slate, new players, and it's NIL. And, let's go. It's make it rain. Here we are. It's just throw it around. But you got to have some key people in place, if you will, in my opinion, to make sure that you don't overspend while establishing what you are in year one. Because what's really interesting is everyone thinks you can just win year in, year out. And for the most part, you can. But I think a 6-year contract is a commitment there for a long term. There's turmoil over, obviously, with Carolina's season this year. We didn't even talk about Wake Forest yet while we're talking about the 4 local Carolina schools and what's most likely to be a talked about topic all of next year, given no change. Like, you have a chance to make an impact and solidify how you operate now and take a big jump to take an even bigger leap, I think, in year 2. Now, look, if North Carolina State makes the NCAA tournament next year, Will Wade may not even be here to do this. If he's able to get NC State into a prominent place and on this weekend next year by wrapping a roster around that fast with this amount of resources, and who knows, that could happen. Boo may be faced with hiring another guy because he may be on to bigger and better things than NC State. Or this becomes a place where you don't do that and it's a longevity play, and now it's NC State versus Duke every year, which gets to my next point.
This segment brought to you by our great friends at Atlantic Tire and Service, where DG and his family take all of their vehicles for routine maintenance, service needs, and a world-class selection of new tires. Atlantic Tire and Service, your one-stop tire and auto repair provider with highly trained technicians and a sales and support staff that are second to none. They've grown to 6 Triangle area locations, 2 in Raleigh, 2 in Cary, 1 in Durham, and 1 in Wake Forest. You can learn more online at AtlanticTireOnline.com.
The team that I'm most worried about in this is Carolina. Wake is always going to have its little sister issues, and they're going to try to figure some stuff out. But in the 3 here in the Triangle, given where Duke's at, given where Carolina State could be, you're in a bad purgatory right now if you're Carolina. You got a lot of figuring out to do right now, and I think you have to get it right. Because if you don't get it right, you could find yourself chasing not just Duke, but NC State in the next couple of years. That's a tough look over in Chapel Hill, I think.
David, I know you taught a lot of college. That ought to be a class that these kids are being given right now in financial and legal literacy to know when they're being lied to, because all they've done is accelerated their already light speed lives to such a degree that you see these big hulking players, Coleman Hawkins, former of Illinois, now at Kansas State, breaking down in tears because of all the pressures on them. And it's almost like, sometimes when you need to be taught a lesson, it's going to come one way or another. That's the one way or another, because I doubt he was listening to a lot of people. No matter how good of a kid he is, he's not listening. And these kids, I mean, they are truly sitting ducks right now. And I feel for them. I feel for the coaches. I feel for the ADs who have to pay for this, because I don't know how you pay for some of this stuff that they're putting out there. You mentioned the Duke quarterback. making $4 million a year. I mean, that guy makes more than the president of Duke University. Only the football coach, the basketball coach, and the head of the Duke Medical Center make more than the quarterback at Duke. If that Marmaduke's making $3.5 million with another $500,000 possible with bonuses, what the hell are you paying your basketball team? I mean, that's my thing. If I'm one of these guys, if I'm Tyrese Proctor, I'm saying this guy wasn't even first team all league in the American last year in football, in a sport that you're never going to compete in. Why are you paying me that amount of money? Because I actually pay off.
And my advice to the young people is just get it in writing.
Oh, yeah.
The lawyer in me suggests get it in writing, especially when it's third parties. This revenue sharing stuff will be well documented, right? The school that you sign with is not going to promise you X in revenue sharing and not deliver that, because there would be massive consequences. There's going to be plenty of documentation. But anything that's promised to you as a recruit that's coming from third parties, get it in writing. And since you have maybe an avalanche of money coming your way, it's not a bad idea to have an attorney look at something, even if maybe your agent is not an attorney. But back to your pecking order question, I believe until further notice, the pecking order here on Tobacco Road goes obviously Duke 1A. I mean, they're signing the prep All-Americans that they want and the transfers that they want, and they have name, image, likeness money, and they have that NBA pipeline reputation that Carolina has lost the reputation for over a period of years. I mean, it's Duke 1. I still think it's Carolina 2, NC State 3, Wake Forest 4. Keep in mind that the Demon Deacons have lost their 3 best players. There's no more Hunter Salas, there's no more Cameron Hildreth, and there's no more Efton Reed. Because of an eligibility rules change, there's a chance Trayvon Spillers, the other of their 4 best players, will come back. So we'll see about that. But Wake, as a private university, even with some very big, deep-pocketed boosters, they sometimes have a hard time playing catch-up financially. But keep in mind this, even under Hubert Davis, who's gotten a lot of criticism, the last 4 years at Carolina would be a dream 4-year stretch at almost any other school. Not Duke, obviously. But if you go to the NCAA title game one year, win an ACC regular season and go to a Sweet 16 another year, make the tournament 3 out of 4 times, sign future pros like Ian Jackson and Drake Powell just last year under Hubert Davis, you're doing things that State could only dream of. You're doing things that Wake could only dream of. You're doing things that 3/4 of the ACC could only dream of. I'm not saying Hubert Davis is beyond criticism, and obviously we've tried to point out his positives and his negatives on our show and our other platforms over these last 4 years. But Carolina is still working from a position of power, because even though money is the starting point, reputation does matter. NBA pipeline does matter. Kids dreaming up, Drake Powell grew up dreaming of playing in the light blue. Now, it doesn't mean he would do it for free in the name, image, likeness world, but it does give you sort of a tiebreaker. If that young man, and he had dozens of schools after him, if dozens of schools are offering the same thing, but your childhood favorite is Carolina, you're going to take the Tar Heels. NC State has been so down for so long with only occasionally peaks that they just don't have that reputation either regionally or nationally. Now, maybe Will Wade can help them get that, but that's speculative. I think it's great that the Wolfpack hired one of the top commodities on this year's coaching carousel. That's never a bad sign, but they need to prove it in those various categories, because Hubert Davis has a national championship trip that these others do not have, has the regular season title these others don't have, has the prep All-Americans that these others don't have. So I think we need to be cautious about knocking the Tar Heels too far down the national pecking order, given their accomplishments historically, but also some significant accomplishments just in these last 4 years under Hubert Davis. Michael Berard, Managing Director Investments with the Founders Group at Stifel, works with a select group of high net worth individuals and institutions to develop and implement investment plans tailored to their specific objectives and risk tolerances. If you are interested in highly personalized, well-researched guidance and outstanding personal service, you can contact Michael at 984-364-2002. That's 984-364-2002. Stiefel Nicholas and Company Incorporated, member SIPC and NYSE.
Now, one team that is still playing in March Madness on the men's side of the tournament is the Duke Blue Devils, and they will be facing Arizona in the Sweet 16, guys. I mean, Duke obviously going to be the big favorite, but how poetic is this again for one Caleb Love to have the opportunity in the NCAA tournament to face off against a team in Duke that he has already come back to Tobacco Road last year and helped Arizona get the win at Cameron Indoor Stadium. I mean, this one really is setting up really well for the former Tar Heel sharpshooter.
You could hear the wheels turning, like he wanted to say something, but he took the high road, which is a credit to him and obviously Tommy Lloyd and stuff. And Tommy, by the way, came back out and was asked a question about Caleb specifically and was effusive in his praise for Caleb. Not an issue, not a problem. Yes or no, sir. No talk back. Like the maturity level that he's taken since being there, it doesn't bode well for Duke if you're a Duke fan, because we know the success that he's had just in that, and he's probably ingested that past success and injected it into his current teammates. But I could tell watching that, or we could probably tell all ascertain watching, like he wanted to say something. Like it's hard to get rid of that disdain when you experience it in a high level game, albeit in each other's gym or in Charlotte or Greensboro or Atlanta in the ACC tournament, let alone the Final Four national championship games, right? So it's going to be very interesting to see how he handles that from a playing perspective when the game comes around. And Arizona obviously had a huge comeback last night after getting down huge against Oregon, spoke volumes to them. And they're a team that the metrics like, and they're there for a reason, and obviously no bigger reason than Caleb. And the added storyline of him being a former Tar Heel in this Duke Tar Heel experience, I can guarantee he's going to be telling a lot of stories to his teammates at Arizona this week.
Yeah, I'm skeptical of Arizona's chances against Duke. Obviously, as I've shared, Duke was the first name I put in the Final Four of my bracket, not only because of how well the Devils are playing, but just because I thought their road to the Final Four was less complicated. I would never say easy, but less complicated than the fellow number one seeds, like a Florida, like a Houston, like an Auburn. And a couple things about Arizona really quickly, and then obviously we got to tip our cap to how the Blue Devils are playing. Arizona gets a lot of work done on the offensive boards, and it is really hard to do that to a Duke team that is the tallest team in the entire country. So that's going to be something to watch. Remember, Clemson, when they beat Duke at Littlejohn, did beat up the Blue Devils on the boards with, the 7-footer Victor Locken and 6'9" Ian Shefflin and 6'10" Chauncey Wiggins. Maybe they were the only team that I recall kind of sticking it to Duke on the boards at either end. The other thing, Duke's only lost 3 times this year, of course. All 3 of those opponents shot a good percentage from three-point land. So I believe they were all 40% or better, which obviously is an elite three-point percentage in any single game. But when Kentucky beat Duke really early this season, they hit a bunch of threes. I think it was 10 or more. When Kansas beat Duke way back around Thanksgiving, they hit a bunch of threes. I believe it was 10 or more. Clemson did not hit as many threes in that win at Littlejohn, but I think it was still 40%, something in that range. Arizona's not a great shooting team. Caleb Love, throughout his entire career, has been much more of a driver than his shooter. He is at about 34% this year. That's better than, the really low valleys of his time with the Tar Heels, where he just could not hit from beyond the arc. But as a team, Arizona's just not a great shooting team. I think Tommy Lloyd is a heck of a coach. I think he's gotten the most out of that group of Wildcats, but I think the Blue Devils, for a lot of different reasons, are just going to be too much for Arizona, because they have, I think it was Hubert Davis who said it at the ACC tournament, Mike, after that semifinal game. Hubert said, this is not a Duke team that leans heavily on 1 or 2 guys.
No.
And he also, I remember specifically, he complimented their unselfishness, which made you wonder, what he thought about the unselfishness in his own locker room over a period of months. That did get better at Carolina as time went on, but it was an issue at times during the season. I mean, Cooper Flagg is the possible national player of the year. He's my national player of the year. Con Knippel was the ACC tournament MVP, right? Tyrese Proctor's playing the best ball of his 3 years at Duke and absolutely shooting the lights out. Sion James, you guys probably noticed, John Shire specifically going out of his way to compliment Sion, whose numbers are not big. But what did he say? John Shire said, I think Sion James is glad he came to Duke because what he does for us is exactly what an NBA team will ask him to do someday. That is just PhD level classic coach psychology. You are complimenting Sion James for not being selfish, for realizing that he has 3 possible NBA lottery picks around him. And you're reminding the world, Sion James, the way he's put together at 6'6", was a 15 plus point per game scorer at Tulane. And he defends for Duke and he distributes for Duke, and he's a fantastic muscular athlete who's not going to be overwhelmed by the strength and speed of the game at the NBA level. So John Shire's complimenting Sion James for one set of reasons, Tyrese Proctor for a different set of reasons. Malawach obviously is a lottery pick because he's 7'2", 250 and rebounds and block shots. I thought it was a little alarming that Baylor's 6'7" big guy, Norchad Omier, he took Malawach to school. If we wanted to nitpick Duke, and that's all it would be doing because there's far more good than bad, Malawach was taken to school by a fifth-year senior big man who's 7 inches shorter than he. But he does everything else right, even if he's not yet as accomplished as he could be. Isaiah Evans has been shooting not as well lately, if we wanted to nitpick. But Patrick Gongba off the bench, Mason Gillis off the bench. Like, what does Duke not have? Other than Malik Brown ailing, and he's your great defender and maybe your best 6-man guy, they have everything you could possibly want to have. They have the most NBA talent. They're well coached. They're unselfish. I think they're number 1 in the offensive efficiency and top 5 in the defensive efficiency. There's only a couple teams in the whole country that are that high in both. They're just, I'm not saying they're a lock to win. College basketball does not work that way. We've been around long enough to see Coach K's 1999 team that absolutely annihilated people all year long, right? Margin of victory, 20-plus points per game in conference play. And they had only lost 1 game all year, but they ultimately lost in the NCAA title game that year. I mean, anything can happen, but I personally will be shocked if Duke doesn't beat Arizona. I'll be surprised if Duke's not in the Final Four. There are other teams capable of winning this national title, of course. But there were 4 strong number 1 seeds going into this event, including Duke, and I still think there are 4 number 1 seeds that are going to be really tough to beat. I just think Duke is the best of those number 1 seeds and the best balanced team and most talented team in the entire country.
As always, folks, we invite you to follow us, the North Carolina Sports Network, on social media at the NC Sports Net, and also check out our all-new website, ncsportsnetwork.com. David Glenn, I know we have a crack staff that is really covering this transfer portal stuff as well as anybody in the country, and we don't badger you for a subscription. It's all free right here on the North Carolina Sports Network.
Yeah, Mike, thanks for bringing this up, because as much as we're going to enjoy the rest of March Madness, Duke and otherwise, keep in mind that even this early in the transfer portal, Virginia has had 3 starters, including sharpshooter Isaac McNeely, that I think a lot of other ACC teams would love to sign. They're already in the portal. Virginia Tech has 5 guys in the portal. The Miami Hurricanes, remember Jay Lucas, Duke assistant coach, now the head coach there. 6 Hurricanes are already in the portal. 2 Florida State starters already in the portal. ACC 6th man of the year, Jeremiah Wilkinson of the Cal Bears, already in the portal. And again, not all these guys are end of the bench dudes. There's a whole bunch of starters. Chris Bell of Syracuse, name in the portal. And that trend goes on and on. Wake Forest, 3 guys already in the portal, including starting point guard Tyler Johnson. So these dominoes are going to continue to fall in terms of outgoing. Of course, just because a guy's name is in the portal, that does not mean he has to leave. You reserve the right to stay. But it's chaos on the outbound. It's soon we're going to have daily articles on incoming transfer signees for both the 18 ACC schools and the 19 Division I schools we cover here across North Carolina. So there's never been a better time to visit our website, ncsportsnetwork.com. We will have daily updates throughout this next month plus as teams are reconfiguring their basketball squads for next season in an entirely different manner than we've seen for as long as we've been covering college basketball.
NC Port, raising the bacon, raising the bar.